The jungle speaks after dark, a language of whispers and broken sounds, a rhythm only the bones understand. Branches tap against each other like restless fingers. Insects hum in waves that rise and fall like machines hidden in the leaves. And somewhere, deeper still, comes the uneven cough of breath, too heavy, too human to belong to the night. None of it is background, none of it is harmless. Out here, every sound is a warning, every silence is a choice. Tonight, we walk beside men trained to listen, men who trusted the dark because they had no other choice, and still, they found it listening back. Ahead, the trail glimmers, a thin strip of moonlight cutting through the trees, silver, fragile, waiting. Step lightly, do not call, do not breathe too loud. Once the jungle notices you, it never forgets. If stories like this follow you into the dark, subscribe to Night Whispers, where the quiet has teeth. The jungle was never silent. Even at night, it lived and moved, filled with 1,000 small voices that never rested. Cicadas droned from unseen branches, frogs croaked from the water's edge, and somewhere far beyond the tree line, something larger cracked through undergrowth with deliberate weight. We told ourselves it was a boar, or maybe a panther. No one dared suggest it was anything else. On night patrol, silence was supposed to be our companion, but in this place, silence didn't exist. Every breath seemed to echo. Every shift of a rifle strap felt like thunder in the stillness. The moon pushed weak light through the canopy, silver patches breaking across the trail, shadows twisting in shapes that seemed to move. Even when the trees were still. We marched in single file, boots sinking into soft earth that seemed to swallow us a little more with each step. The corporal led, radio clipped to his vest, its antenna swaying like an insect's feeler. The static was constant. Sometimes it hissed, sometimes it whispered, and sometimes, when the night stretched too thin, it carried fragments of words. Not clear enough to understand, but enough to remind us that the air itself was listening. Torres muttered under his breath, cursing the heat. Sweat rolled down his neck, cutting pale lines through dirt smeared across his skin. The air pressed close, damp and heavy, as though the jungle leaned in to hear our footsteps. Each exhale came out ragged. Each inhale tasted of wet leaves and soil gone sour. The corporal raised his hand. We froze. He tilted his head, listening. The jungle's chorus seemed to pause with him, a brief moment where all insects, all frogs, all night things fell quiet. The silence was worse than the noise. It pressed in, thick and expectant, like holding your breath inside a church where something sacred had already died. Then the radio hissed, not with orders, not with code words, but with something low, steady, almost human. Breathing. A rasp dragged across the channel, in and out, deliberate. It was followed by a word, broken in static, repeated twice. None of us said what we heard, but we all knew it was a name. Someone's name. The corporal twisted the dial until the sound died, then pushed forward without a word. But from that moment on, the jungle felt different. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. The trail narrowed, vines drooping low enough to brush against helmets, roots rising across the dirt like bones pushing through shallow graves. Torres stumbled, catching himself on a trunk slick with moss. His boot had struck something buried just beneath the surface. He bent, wiped it clear, and froze. Not a root, a rib. Weathered, smooth, shaped by time, but unmistakably human. He dropped it. The sound should have clattered, sharp against the ground. Instead, it vanished, swallowed instantly by the air. Like the jungle refused to let it escape. We moved on, slower now, Rifles raised though no target presented itself. Every shadow felt deeper, every branch seemed to lean closer. The trees stood like soldiers of another age, bark split and scarred, their roots twisting in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Something brushed against my shoulder. I spun, rifle up. Nothing but vines swaying gently, though the air was still. My pulse hammered, but I forced my boots forward. The corporal glanced back once, his eyes hard and unblinking. A warning I didn't need spelled out. Don't break. Don't give in. We reached a bend where the trail curved sharply, swallowed by darkness. Beyond it, the canopy pressed tighter, moonlight cut away until only blackness waited. The corporal raised his hand again, signaling caution. We listened. The sound came then, low, dragging, steady. Not animal, not human. Something moving, heavy, deliberate, just beyond sight. Every man's rifle lifted, every breath caught. The jungle did not return to noise this time. It held its silence, patient, watching. The drag grew closer, then stopped altogether, as if whatever hunted us had paused to listen in return. For a long moment, no one moved. The trail ahead seemed endless. The darkness beyond the bend looked less like absence of light and more like an open mouth. Waiting. We stepped forward anyway, one boot, then another. Because on patrol, you don't stop, not even when the jungle itself feels like it's breathing with you, waiting for the moment you finally breathe wrong. The jungle opened into a small clearing where the trees bent back just enough to let the moonlight spill in, pale and sharp, like a blade pressed against the earth. We stopped there, breathing harder than we should have, each man adjusting his rifle, though none of us admitted why. The clearing should have been a relief, but instead it felt exposed, a stage built for something to step out and watch us. The corporal crouched low, scanning the undergrowth. His radio crackled softly, the sound sharp against the hush, then cleared with a single click. Not static, not feedback, but a click, as though someone on the other end had pressed the transmit button, and then let it go. We froze. Every man knew what that sound meant. Someone was on the line. Someone was listening. HQ, the corporal whispered into the mic. Nothing. Only the faint hiss of open air. Then another click. This time, it was followed by a voice, but so faint, so broken by static, that at first it sounded like the wind. A single word cut through, stretched and unnatural, closer. Torres swore under his breath, gripping his rifle tighter. No one laughed at him. No one spoke at all. The corporal twisted the knob, trying to clean the signal, but all it brought was more breathing. Long, uneven pulls of air, dragging in and out, like someone was crouched close to the mic, speaking without words. We wanted to move, but the clearing felt locked, like the trees had folded in and built walls of leaves around us. The corporal finally cut the radio, tucking it against his chest, then waved us forward. His hand shook once before he steadied it. That was the moment I knew he was hearing the same thing we were, and he was just as afraid. The trail narrowed again, darker now, as though the moon had been swallowed whole. The air smelled wrong, like copper and old smoke. My throat tightened with every breath, as if the jungle had shifted and the oxygen was thinning out on purpose. Torres began humming under his breath, tuneless, broken. None of us told him to stop. Sometimes noise is the only thing keeping the silence from becoming something worse. Half a mile deeper, we came across it. A post, wooden, splintered, driven into the earth like a marker. No writing on it, no carvings, just rope wrapped around its top, frayed and blackened, as though it had once held something heavy. At its base, a helmet rested, dented, streaked with rust. American issue. The corporal picked it up, turning it slowly in his hands. His flashlight beam caught on the inside. Not rust. Scratches. Dozens of them, layered over one another, all the same, for short lines, and then a fifth, crossing through .5 marks. Again and again, and again. A tally dot. He set it back down carefully, as though the ground itself would punish him for taking it further. We didn't speak, but each of us counted the marks in silence, though none of us finished. There were too many. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The forest behind us stirred. Branches shifting, leaves breaking, a weight moving carefully, deliberately, just beyond sight. Torres spun, rifle raised, his breath sharp and ragged. The sound stopped instantly. Then the radio clicked again, not in the corporal's hand. From somewhere in the trees, .1 click. Then silence. Then two. A code, too deliberate to be chance. The corporal hissed for us to move, and we did, faster than before, boots striking earth in a rhythm that felt almost panicked. The trail twisted, the air thinned, and still the clicks followed, sometimes behind, sometimes to the left, sometimes impossibly close, as if something unseen walked among us, carrying its own radio, waiting for us to answer, and then the voice returned, clearer this time. Low and steady, keep walking. The path narrowed as the jungle thickened, vines dripping with dew, brushing across helmets, leaving trails of silver in the moonlight. The men moved in single file, slower now, rifles raised, eyes shifting from shadow to shadow. The sergeant's radio hissed faintly, static cutting through the night, almost like whispering. No voice, only that strange, broken sound, and then silence. The point man, Rivas, froze, raising his hand. His gaze locked on the tree lean to the right. At first, the others saw nothing, only bark, vines, branches swaying. Then it emerged, darker than shadow, a tall shape pressed between two trees, narrow at the top, wide at the base, as if the night had gathered itself into a figure. Rivas whispered, voice trembling, "Do you see that?" The squad squinted, and slowly, heads began to nod. They saw it. Silent, unmoving, faceless. The sergeant called out, voice sharp, but steady, "Identify yourself." His words fell flat. The shape did not move. Its edges seemed to ripple, like smoke caught in still air. Seconds dragged, the silence heavier than gunfire. Then, at the sergeant's order, they advanced 3 steps. Boots pressed into damp earth, rifles locked forward. The moonlight broke through the tree lean, and the figure was gone. Vanished. The vines swayed as though disturbed. The trees leaned as though pushed. But nothing stood there now. A curse broke the silence, whispered and afraid. No way, it was right there. Eyes up, the sergeant snapped, though his own tone had lost its weight. He had seen it too. They pressed deeper into the jungle, every sound now sharpened into warning. Roots clutched at their boots, vines clawed at their sleeves. Always, the feeling of being watched lingered. Just out of reach. At last, they reached a clearing. Moonlight poured down, washing the tall grass and the wreckage of an old camp, collapsed canvas, rusting frames, scattered pits of fire long dead. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though nothing burned. In the center of the clearing, the ground was pressed flat. A wide, perfect circle, as though something large had lain there. No footprints led in, none led out. Only wait. Waiting, the sergeant knelt, touched the soil. Damp, fresh. He drew back his hand, whispering, "This doesn't make sense." The radio hissed again, louder this time, a crackling scream of static. The men flinched, rifles snapping toward the sound, though it came only from the device. The sergeant twisted the dial, breath ragged. Beneath the static, faint but clear, came slow breathing. Heavy. "Close. Who is this?" he demanded, pressing the receiver to his lips. "Identify yourself." The breathing stopped. Silence. At the far edge of the clearing, the shape returned. Taller now, clearer, standing between the trees. The squad raised their rifles in unison, fear tightening every trigger finger. The figure shifted, sliding along the tree lean, gliding sideways, patient, circling. "Hold your fire," the sergeant barked, though his voice cracked. "Do not shoot unless fired upon." The soldiers turned as one, rifles tracking the shadow as it drifted, then vanished, swallowed by the dark once again. The silence afterward pressed down like stone. No one moved. No one spoke. The clearing felt too open, too bright, a trap of silver light where something watched from just beyond reach. Finally, the sergeant whispered, "We move." "Now." The squad fell into line, boots crunching through grass, rifles raised. They stepped back under the canopy, and the jungle swallowed them whole. Shadows deepened, branches closed overhead, and though the figure was gone, every man felt it walking behind them, close enough to touch. The trail sloped downward, roots giving way to mud, the smell of water rising ahead. The squad pressed on, their boots sucking into the soft ground, the weight of silence dragging heavier with each step. Somewhere beyond the trees, a river moved, though no sound carried. No frogs, no insects, no current. Just the heavy hush of air too still to be natural. When they reached the bank, the moonlight revealed a wide ribbon of black water, smooth as glass, unmoving. No ripples, no flow, as though the river held its breath. The men gathered at the edge, scanning left and right, waiting for a shimmer, a sign of movement. Nothing. "Rivers don't sit still," muttered Harker, his voice low. "This ain't right." The sergeant crouched, dipping his hand into the surface. The water clung to his skin like oil, thick, slow to drip. He shook his hand hard, wiping it against his sleeve, but the damp lingered, refusing to leave. Across the river, the treeline rose like a wall, the shadows deeper, hungrier. And then, faintly, something shifted in the dark. A splash, soft, deliberate, breaking the perfect stillness. The men raised their rifles, eyes narrowing at the center of the river. The water rippled, small circles widening. Then came another ripple, and another. Something beneath the surface moved slowly toward them. "Eyes up," the sergeant ordered, voice hushed, strained. The ripples spread wider, closer, until the men could see a shape just below the waterline, long, pale, the curve of something that might have been an arm or a branch. Or bone. It sank before they could see more, leaving only the silent surface. "Cross." Rivas whispered. The sergeant hesitated. His orders had been clear: keep to the path, stay moving, reach the checkpoint by dawn. But the jungle had shifted around them, twisting routes that no map could trace. The river was in their way, and whatever hid in it was waiting, fast and quiet, he finally said. No lights, no noise. We crossed together. The squad waded in, boots vanishing into the black, rifles lifted high above their heads. The water clung cold, thick, dragging at their legs as though it didn't want them to pass. Step by step, the current never shifted, but the weight of it grew heavier, pulling at belts, clutching at knees. Halfway across, Harker gasped, jerking his rifle downward. Something touched me, he hissed. It grabbed me. "Keep moving," the sergeant snapped, though his voice faltered. The men pressed forward, their breathing louder, harsher, filling the air where the jungle stayed silent. Then came the sound. A deep, rushing inhale, rising not from the trees, but from the water itself, as though the river had lungs. The surface rippled, shivering under moonlight. Dark bubbles rose, bursting with soft pops around their knees. "Faster," the sergeant urged. They stumbled forward, water dragging like chains, until the far bank rose ahead. One by one, they climbed out, boots slipping against mud, gasping as though they had run miles. When the last man scrambled up, the river behind them went still again. Smooth, perfect, breathless, but before they could move on, they saw it. Across the river, where they had entered, a row of figures now stood at the tree-lean, motionless, watching. Their shapes were black against the moonlight, faceless, silent, as though the jungle itself had taken human form. None of them had been there before. Eyes forward, the sergeant whispered, though his hands trembled against his rifle. "We keep moving." The squad turned into the trees, hearts pounding, breaths uneven, but no one dared look back. Not at the figures still waiting at the river's edge, nor at the water that had begun to ripple again, quietly, as though something beneath it had decided to follow. The trail curved through the trees, and the first thing we noticed was the smell. Not the rot of jungle soil, not the smoke of a campfire, but something colder, something dry, like dust where there should be rain. We slowed without speaking, rifles rising on instinct, boots sinking quieter into the mud. The village appeared in pieces, a broken fence first, then the shape of roofs pressed low beneath the moon. Dozens of huts, woven from bamboo and palm, crouched along the riverbank. Their thatched tops should have been fraying, leaning with years of weather, but they weren't. They were neat, straight, as if someone had rebuilt them just yesterday, and yet no smoke curled from the fires. No lanterns glowed. No dogs barked at our approach. No one came to meet us. "Clear," Martinez whispered, though none of us believed it. We fanned out between the huts, our shadows bending across walls that looked too clean. My hand brushed a window frame, no dust, no moss, no webs. As if these homes had been lived in moments ago, I paused at a doorway, listening. The air inside was colder than outside, a hollow chill that seeped from the dark. My flashlight cut across a room perfectly ordered, mats rolled, bowls stacked, clothes folded by the wall. But the mats had the impression of bodies in them, shallow dips, like someone had just risen and stepped away. Behind me, someone hissed. I turned to see Clark pointing. A table stood in the center of the path, a wooden bowl resting on top. Inside it, fruit, bright as though freshly picked. Bananas, papayas, mangoes. No flies, no smell of rot. Their skins shone with dew, as though they had been laid there moments before we arrived. We circled tighter, shoulders brushing, rifles twitching. "Where are they?" Alvarez muttered. "Where the hell are they?" His voice carried too far, and all at once the night answered, not with words, not with footsteps, but with silence. The jungle had gone quiet, the frogs and insects cut off mid-chorus, like someone had thrown a switch. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums until you can hear your own pulse. I felt eyes. Not one pair, but dozens, from every window, every hut. Curtains hung still, yet the sense of watching grew so heavy it made my chest tighten. Martinez flicked his light into the nearest doorway. The beam caught something written across the far wall, long streaks of dark, finger-thick lines. Not letters, not language, just strokes, looping, circling, rising like smoke patterns. They dripped as though painted with tar, though the air smelled of iron, metallic, sharp. We pulled back, one step, then another, until we stood in the center of the village again, all of us facing different directions, rifles trembling in our hands. The fruit sat on the table, glowing faintly under the moon, and then movement. Not outside, inside. A shadow crossed the far wall of one hut, sliding across the window. Another shifted behind the doorframe to my left. They weren't shapes we could see clearly, only the suggestion of bodies that weren't really there. "Eyes on me," the sergeant whispered, low and urgent. "Eyes on me. We're pulling out." But I couldn't look away from the bowl. The fruit was changing. The skins, so perfect a moment ago, now sagged, darkened, spots spreading like bruises. A sweet, rancid smell crawled up into my throat. By the time I blinked, the fruit was black, soft, sinking into itself, the bowl filling with liquid that looked too thick to be juice. I stumbled back, gagging. And in that stagger, I saw them, faces. Dozens of them, pressed against the windows. Pale, empty-eyed, mouths open as if caught mid-breath. They did not move, did not blink, did not fade. They simply watched, and in the stillness, the first sound returned. Not frogs, not insects. A single voice. A child, whispering from the dark. It said one word: "Stay." We left the village in silence, no one daring to speak, each step heavier than the last. The jungle had grown thick again, pressing close, as if it wanted to keep us inside its ribs. The path was narrow, our boots sinking into mud, branches clawing at our sleeves. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest knew we were running, that it enjoyed watching us try. The sergeant raised his hand, and we froze. Ahead, something moved, not with the quick skitter of animals, not with the sway of vines, but with weight, with intention. The trees bent ever so slightly, as though bracing against the thing that leaned on them. At first, I thought it was mist. A low drift of pale gray that curled between trunks. But then it thickened, drawing itself upward, taking shape. The outline of a body, too tall, shoulders scraping branches, arms that seemed too long, tapering into the dark. Clark whispered, eyes forward, though his voice cracked. The figure didn't walk. It swayed, like a pendulum, slow, deliberate, moving side to side as though listening to the sound of our breath. And though its face was shadow, there was no mistaking the glint of eyes, wet and sharp as stones in the riverbed. We lifted our rifles, the metal shaking in our hands. On my mark, the sergeant murmured. Steady, the jungle answered before he finished. Not with the thing, not yet, but with everything else. The frogs screamed first, then the birds burst from the canopy, wings thrashing in wild panic. Even the leaves seemed to rattle like dry bones. And beneath it all, a low groan rolled from the trees. A sound so deep it rattled my teeth, a sound that felt less like noise and more like hunger. The sergeant hissed, "Fall back," but the thing had already moved. It didn't lunge. It didn't rush. It simply vanished from where it had been and reappeared closer. 10 feet. 5. Its edges smeared like smoke, its body half-formed in the glow of our flashlights. One arm reached out, long enough that it could have touched me, fingers curling like roots pulled from the earth. I fired first. The muzzle flash tore the dark apart, the jungle echoing with the crack of the rifle. The others followed, bursts of light tearing into the night, rounds stitching across the shape. For a heartbeat, I thought we'd killed it. Then the smoke cleared. The thing hadn't moved. Not an inch. The trees behind it bore holes, shredded leaves, bark splintered. But the figure remained untouched, its eyes glowing brighter, reflecting our fire like glass. It swayed again. And as it swayed, the sound returned. That groan, only louder now, vibrating in the pit of my stomach. The trees leaned with it, branches creaking, roots splitting from the ground. Martinez screamed and broke formation, running back down the trail. The sergeant cursed, ordering us to hold, but his voice shook. None of us wanted to stay, and then, just as sudden, the thing stopped. Its head tilted, listening to something we couldn't hear. Slowly, it turned, its body sliding between trunks like fog breaking apart. Within seconds, it was gone. The jungle stood still, the silence settling again like a lid on a coffin. We didn't breathe. We didn't speak. Not until the sergeant rasped, "Move." But the jungle wasn't done with us. From the canopy above, something dropped. Not the figure itself, not flesh, but pieces. Leaves, feathers, shreds of cloth. A soldier's torn sleeve, its patch still stitched on. I recognized the insignia, though it wasn't ours. It belonged to another unit, one rumored to have vanished on patrol 2 years before. We stared at the fabric as it dangled in the mud. None of us bent to pick it up, because in the trees above, we heard breathing, slow, deep, patient, and it was not leaving. The jungle closed over us again, heavy with heat, heavy with silence. We marched faster than we should have, stumbling over roots, sliding on wet ground, but none of us cared. The thing in the trees had vanished, yet its absence felt worse than its presence. At least when it swayed before us, we could see where the fear belonged. Now it was everywhere. Clark's radio crackled suddenly, sharp enough to make us all flinch. He pressed the receiver to his ear, whispering, "Command, this is Delta Squad. Do you copy?" Static hissed back, a long exhale of white noise. Then, faintly, words. Not clear, not whole. A voice broken into fragments, like syllables torn apart by distance. Left, stay, still. The sergeant leaned in, demanding, "Say again, command, repeat transmission." But the reply was worse, "Behind you." The radio went dead. Every man turned, weapons raised, scanning the black wall of trees. Shadows shivered with the sway of branches, but nothing stepped forward. No sound, no movement, except our ragged breath. Clark cursed under his breath and smacked the radio, but it didn't matter. The device glowed red for a moment, then dimmed, like its battery had been drained in an instant. We moved again. Slower now, every twig snapped beneath our boots like thunder in our ears. The sergeant muttered coordinates under his breath, but his voice was thin, more for himself than for us. We were lost, and we all knew it. Then, far ahead, a light appeared. A pale circle in the dark, flickering as though seen through heavy leaves. Not moonlight, it pulsed too irregularly, like a lantern swinging. Martinez whispered, "That's them. It has to be the village patrol, right?" No one answered. We approached carefully, weapons raised, the light growing brighter until it revealed a clearing. And in the center, a radio set sat on the ground. Old, battered, its metal casing rusted and streaked with mud. The glow we'd seen came from the dial, faint and unnatural, humming like a live coal. The sergeant gestured for silence. He crouched, circling the radio, eyes narrow. It looked abandoned for years, vines coiled through its frame, yet the glow persisted, steady and strong. Then it spoke, not through the receiver, but through the casing itself, a vibration in the air that made the leaves tremble. "Stay, stay, stay." The voice was familiar. It was Clark's voice. Clark stumbled back, his rifle clattering against his chest. That's me. That's my voice. I didn't. Before he could finish, the sound changed. The radio coughed static, then another voice bled through. It was Martinez, screaming. Not the Martinez standing beside us, but another, crying out as though being torn apart. The jungle echoed with it, real and raw, and Martinez's face went white, his body shaking. We tried to destroy it. Clark swung his rifle, but down on the machine, sparks flying as the casing cracked. But the glow only brightened, the voices overlapping now, every one of them ours. The sergeant shouting orders, my own voice begging for silence, all tangled together in a chorus that didn't stop even when the radio was smashed flat in the dirt. We left it there, glowing, whispering, humming as though alive. The jungle swallowed us again. But now it carried our voices, echoing faintly through the trees. Every so often I heard myself, a fragment of a word, a single syllable floating from the shadows. We walked faster, because if the jungle carried our voices, then something was listening, and if it was listening, it could answer. The jungle opened at last, spilling us into a clearing where the ground sloped down toward water. A river wide and slow, black under the moon. Mist hovered above it, silver in the light, moving as though it breathed. For the first time in hours, we felt air shift around us, cooler, damp with the smell of moss and decay. The sergeant held up a hand, signaling halt. None of us argued. The river looked calm, but calm in the jungle never meant safe. Martinez crouched, peering at the water. No current, he whispered. That's not right. He was right. The surface lay too still, like glass stretched across a wound. Even when branches dipped from the trees above, the water barely rippled. It was waiting. We scanned the opposite bank. Dark trees leaned close, their reflections clear as though painted. No trail, no bridge, just shadow. Clark broke the silence. We'll have to cross. The sergeant's jaw tightened. We don't cross until I say we cross. The jungle behind us hissed with insects, and somewhere deep inside it, something cracked. A branch, heavy and deliberate. The kind of sound made by something with weight, not wind. Every man felt the push of choice pressing on him. Move forward or wait for what was behind. The sergeant gave the order. 2 at a time. Slow. Keep your rifles above the waterline. No noise. Martinez and Clark went first. They stepped into the river, boots sinking into the soft mud of the bank. Water reached their knees, then their waists. Still, it barely moved. Halfway across, Clark froze. His face turned pale in the moonlight, eyes fixed on something below. Something's down there, he whispered. We couldn't see it. The water was too dark, too thick. But his expression told us enough. Martinez gripped his shoulder, urging him forward. They moved again, every step cautious, every splash echoing too loud, then the riverside. Not the wind, not the current. A deep, hollow sound, like the water exhaled. The mist above it stirred, and ripples spread outward, circling the two men like hands reaching up. Faster, the sergeant hissed. Martinez and Clark stumbled, their rifles clutched to their chests, and the water climbed higher. Higher than their shoulders, though the river had not deepened. Martinez gasped, choking, as though invisible arms pulled him down. We shouted, but no one fired. What could we shoot at? The sergeant bellowed. Pull them out. 3 of us rushed forward, wading into the water, grabbing at their straps. Clark came free first, coughing, his boots slipping in the muck. Martinez fought harder, something unseen holding him under. For a moment, only his face broke the surface, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then we pulled, all together, and he burst free, dragging water like oil clinging to his skin. We collapsed on the bank, gasping. The river went still again, smooth as glass, as if nothing had happened. No one spoke. Martinez lay shivering, staring at his hands. His palms were raw, streaked with dark welts, as though fingers had been wrapped around them, squeezing. Behind us, the jungle shifted once more. Branches cracking, the weight of something moving closer. The sergeant stood, his voice low, unsteady for the first time. "We keep moving. Stay close. Don't stop for anything." The river tried to keep us, but it failed. Whatever's behind us won't. We followed, leaving the water behind, but its reflection clung in my mind, because in the stillness of the river, I had seen our faces looking back, and they had not been our own. We left the river behind, but the sound of it stayed, pressing against our ears like a memory that wouldn't fade. The jungle swallowed us again, heavy with vines and damp air, the kind of silence that makes you check your rifle even when you know it's loaded. The sergeant set the pace, faster now, his jaw clenched, eyes searching for a path that didn't exist. The moon had shifted, climbing higher, but under the canopy it barely mattered. The trail narrowed, weaving between trunks thick as towers, roots twisting up from the ground like ropes meant to trip us. Every man felt it then. The jungle wasn't just closing in. It was steering us. "Sir," Clark whispered, "we've circled." He was right. Ahead of us, etched faintly into the bark of a leaning tree, was Martinez's knife mark. A line we had cut hours before. We hadn't gone forward. We'd been pushed back. The sergeant didn't curse, didn't raise his voice. He only nodded once, grim. "They're hurting us." No one asked who they were. By now, every man had his own image. Shadows that moved faster than eyes could follow, faces glimpsed in the mist, the river's unseen hands. We pushed on, rifles ready, nerves tight. That was when the jungle began to change. The air turned cooler, the scent sharper, like iron and wet stone. The ground flattened, smoothed, as though swept clean. Then, almost without warning, the trees fell away. We stepped into a clearing, wide and perfect, ringed by trees that leaned inward like sentries. Moonlight cut across the space, painting it pale. At the center, a circle of stones jutted from the earth, black and slick as if burned. The perimeter, Martinez muttered, voice shaking. It was no trail marker, no human camp. The stones formed a boundary, a wall without walls, and every instinct screamed not to cross it. The sergeant moved to the edge, scanning the line. "This is where they wanted us," he said softly. "This is the cage." Then we heard it. From the trees came the sound of movement, many feet, padding, circling. Low murmurs, like breath forced through teeth. Shapes flickered between trunks, too tall for men, too fast for animals. We raised our rifles, barrels sweeping, but the sergeant lifted his hand. "Don't fire until you see them," he ordered. The shapes drew closer. The circle of stones seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, a dull sheen that spread across their surfaces like veins of silver. And with it came a pressure, a weight in the chest, as though the air itself thickened. Martinez dropped to his knees, gasping. Clark cursed, clutching his temples. I felt it too, a pulse behind the eyes, a rhythm not our own. The jungle was breathing us in. Something moved at the edge of the clearing. A figure stepped forward, breaking from the shadows. Not beast, not man. Its outline blurred, as though the moonlight refused to hold it. Limbs too long, head tilting at angles that strained bone. Its face, or what should have been a face, was only smooth skin, pale and shining. It stopped just outside the circle of stones, as though bound by them, Another figure appeared. Then another, dozens, surrounding us, watching, waiting. The sergeant's voice cut through, low and steady though his eyes betrayed fear. This is their ground. They want us inside that ring. We all understood, stepped forward, and we entered their perimeter. Stay where we were, and the jungle closed behind us. Clark whispered, "There's no way out." The sergeant's hand tightened on his rifle. "There's always a way out," he said, though his voice cracked on the words. The pale figures swayed in unison, silent, their smooth faces turned toward us like mirrors with no reflection. The jungle waited, and we stood on the edge of the stones, knowing the next step would decide who walked back and who stayed forever. The stones hummed, faint but steady, like a current buried in the ground. Each breath inside the clearing felt borrowed, the air thick and wet, pressing against our lungs. The figures waited at the edge of the trees, their pale forms swaying as though stirred by an invisible wind. They did not speak, they did not advance, yet we felt their command, urging us forward into the circle. The sergeant's hand clenched the strap of his rifle. "If we cross, we're theirs," he whispered. "If we stand here, we starve or worse." Clark shook his head, sweat dripping down his temple. "They'll never let us leave," he said. "Not after this. We've already seen too much." No one answered. Each of us felt the same truth, that the jungle wasn't keeping us out. It was keeping us in. The first sound came from behind us. A twig snapped. Then another. We spun around, rifles raised, but there was nothing, only more shadows, more dark trunks leaning in. When I turned back, one of the pale figures had stepped closer. Not across the stones, but nearer, its outline sharper, more human than before. Its head tilted, slow and deliberate, as though listening to something we couldn't hear. Martinez whispered, "They're not waiting. They're changing." And he was right. Their shapes rippled, lengthening, hardening, until some looked like soldiers. Like us. Rifles in their hands, helmets bent low, but their faces were still smooth, blank, pale. Echoes of men who had walked here before and never left. The sergeant's voice dropped to a growl. "Hold your ground." The figures moved in rhythm, circling, their silent march tightening with each step. The stones pulsed brighter, veins of silver streaking across their surfaces, and the pressure in my skull sharpened into a knife edge. I bit down hard, tasting blood, but the pain only deepened. The jungle wanted us inside. The sergeant looked at us one by one, his eyes steady though his face was pale. "If we fall," he said, "we fall together. No running." Then, without waiting, he stepped into the circle. The moment his boot crossed the stones, the air cracked like thunder without sound. The ground shook, the trees bent inward, and the pale figures froze. For a heartbeat, the clearing was still, everything balanced on the edge of breaking. Then the jungle roared. The figures surged forward, colliding against the invisible wall of the stones. Their hands slapped the barrier, clawing, pushing, yet they could not enter. Their smooth faces twisted, shifting, showing flashes of mouths, of eyes, of bone. Each glimpse lasted only a second, but it was enough to freeze my blood. Inside the circle, the sergeant lifted his rifle. "Now," he shouted. We followed, one by one, forced into the ring by the crush of the faceless horde. The air within the stones burned cold, colder than ice, pulling the breath from our lungs. Every step forward felt like sinking deeper into water, and then light.it burst from the stones, searing silver, shooting upward like pillars of fire. The jungle shrieked, the figures reeled, their forms unraveling into mist. The trees bent, cracked, and the sky itself seemed to ripple. For a moment, I thought we were free, but when the light dimmed, when the roar faded, the clearing was gone. We stood in another jungle, same air, same trees, but different. The river was silent. The trail had vanished. No marks on the bark, no path back. The sergeant's face was drawn, hollow. He lowered his rifle, his voice quiet, almost broken. "It wasn't a cage," he said. "It was a door." Behind us, the pale figures returned, stepping out of the mist, endless, countless, waiting. Martinez began to sob. Clark dropped to his knees, and I understood then. The patrol had never ended. The jungle had taken us, reshaped us, made us part of its perimeter. The last thing I remember is the cold seeping into my hands, the rifle slipping from my grip, and the sound of the faceless soldiers marching, our march, their march, forever in the dark. The jungle speaks after dark. And once you answer, it never lets you stop listening.